I just got to give you some background about how I became acquainted with Josh. In the late 1990s, when I was director of Youth Service Bureau, we were asked by the superintendent of Mendota schools to apply for a small grant with them to support a school-based outreach effort in Mendota elementary schools. There were parents in Mendota, many of them who came to work at the Del Monte canning plant there, that were afraid to enroll their school-age kids in preschool or kindergarten. They didn't understand vaccination requirements. They couldn't communicate with people in the school, and they didn't feel welcome. So the superintendent wanted to do something about that. Thought the best way to do that would be to introduce somebody from outside their school system. So we got the grant. We hired a local bilingual social worker, Sarah Escatel. She was from the Mendota community, and she began to work closely with those families. My real education about immigration and immigrants in our area, both what they needed and what they contributed, began right there. So after a while, the funding for that little grant ran out. We really didn't want to stop that effort. So we began to look for other funds, and Sarah, I wish I could say that I discovered this, but Sarah discovered an organization called the Illinois Coalition for Immigration and Refugee Rights. And she began to attend their meetings. And before you know it, we were funded by them to expand our work with immigrant families. Our mission at YSB was to help children and families succeed. And there was nothing in that mission statement that talked about citizenship status, so we wanted to help those children and families succeed. One of the things that we did early on, we helped ICIRR gain entrance to Monterey Farms. That's the mushroom plant out by Depew. So I was on that tour with a researcher from UIC, some of Josh's staff, and a reporter from the New York Times. They were interested in better understanding and telling the story of rural migration to the States and how there were pockets of immigrants all across the country, like we had in LaSalle and Bureau County. So we toured the mushroom plant, and I have never bought a box of mushrooms since that day that I didn't think of conditions inside that plant and how cheap those mushrooms are. So I learned about not just a mushroom plant, but other local workplaces where immigrant labor is indispensable, legal status is ignored, and the future of the people that work there are always in doubt. So here's one of the first basic things I learned about immigration. Imagine you're approaching our country from the southern border, and you get to the border and you see two signs. And the first sign really plainly, sternly says, "Keep out." And standing with that sign is a man that's armed with a uniform, and he looks really stern. But behind him, there's another man, and he's kind of doing this, and he's smiling, and his sign says, "Hiring today." So the thing about immigration is it's really complicated, and we give double messages about it. So after a while, Sarah said, she'd been attending a meeting, she said, "You gotta come and see one of these meetings in Chicago. They're not really a funder, they're a movement." So I went to one of the meetings, their membership meetings, and there were more groups there than I really knew existed. There were African immigrant groups, Korean and Chinese organizations, Islamic organizations, immigrants from India, immigrant organizations representing different Mexican states, and religious groups that were concentrating on helping refugees. So I realized that they came together under the umbrella of one organization because they were united in seeking justice and acceptance for themselves and their families. And they just wanted to take their place in this country that they were already a part of. And the integration that brought them together was ICIRR. The person that inspired and held that organization together at the time was Josh Hoyt. So I met him, worked with him, and I've stayed in touch with him since. Josh has really devoted his career to bringing justice to immigrants and refugees and helping our government do the right thing. He's now executive director of the National Partnership for New Americans in Washington. He knows more about these issues than I ever will, so that's why I'm so glad he came with his wife Joanna to share his knowledge and experience with us. So please welcome Joshua Hoyt.
Hi. So I'm a Chicagoan, and I'm actually very, very happy to be here. Dave extended the invitation, and people talk now about living in bubbles. I don't like living in bubbles. I actually am very curious about people, all kinds of people, which is one of the reasons I work with immigrants and refugees. So I'm actually hoping that, I'll share what I know. I'm a very good generalist. When you want to start getting into the specific legal questions, we'll have to get an attorney up here. I'm not an attorney. I'm a Chicago community organizer. You probably know something about what that means. I joke about it means you get down in the gutter and you kick and scratch and bite and claw, and then if you've actually been able to hurt the other guy, you get up and you say, let's be partners. But Dave communicated a little bit about what it means. If you noticed, he said that he was attracted to our organization because of a grant. And so we tried to build power for immigrants. And since we're from Chicago, we understand the power of patronage. So this combination of self-interest, we tried to get people working together because it makes sense and you can do things that you can't do alone. But also because, well, you got grants. How do you make things work, right? So this was a Chicago-based immigrant justice organization. We figured grants is a good way to get people's attention. But then it actually was a whole lot more than that. And the reason it is because what holds people together really are shared values. And so we built an organization. Dave called it a movement. It was a movement. There was a movement. There is a movement. But it does start with values. I've been organizing on June 1st for 40 years. I started June 1st, 1977. And I came to the work because of a couple of different sets of values that are sometimes in tension with each other, but you can also make them work. And one of them is faith values. And I'm Roman Catholic, was raised Roman Catholic, and we talk about the common good, that we have to think about, well, we're all in this together. Just actually have to think not just about yourself, but about others. We actually, as Catholics, we break it down into distributive, commutative, and social justice. Distributive is charity, soup kitchens and helping other people. Commutative justice is ethics. You need to give an honest day's work for a day's pay. You need to not cheat people. And then social justice. And social justice is about dealing with societal issues that are systems that hurt people. And you can't solve a problem like that unless you do it with other people, right? You can be an ethical person by yourself. You can be a charitable person by yourself, but you can't do justice by yourself. You have to work with other people in order to solve social sin. And the social teachings of the Catholic Church start with Genesis 1:26, which is, we are all created in the image and likeness of God. In other words, whether it's the migrant who's working in the mushroom factory or the banker in town, we're all children of God, created in his or her image and likeness. And I don't know if the Catholics talk about the her part, but anyway, this is UCC. You guys, you're all right, right? Okay. Image and likeness of God. That means that you have to see God in the human person. You have to work for the dignity of that person. Those are faith values that I come to this work with. I studied in Spain my junior year so that I could go into business, my junior year in college, and it happened to be the year that Franco died. That he was the longtime, very right-wing conservative dictator, and I'd never been in a country where terror was used to maintain power. And when you come from the United States and you come from a democracy, it's really hard to understand what that actually feels like. Every day out in front of the university, there was a great big bus of military police with shields, with machine guns, with billy clubs. And anytime anybody put up a poster that had political content, a group of 30 of them would march through the university and tear it down. Every single public building had men with submachine guns, and when you went to ask them a question, they would face you like this with their hands on the trigger. The night that Franco died, I went out on the Rambla, which is the beautiful strip that goes from the port to the plaza, and it's full of like little stands that sell pets, birds, and coffee shops, and sell newspapers, and it felt really, really tense. And so I was like, what's going on? What's going on? And then I saw some shopkeeper, and he was running with water, and he was trying to wash up the sidewalk, and it was all red. And I said, oh my God, is that blood? And then there was a big group of guys, and all of a sudden they pulled on armbands with the Spanish flag and surrounded these young students and started going through their bags to find out if they had any anti-Franco literature. They were just young kids, they're probably high school age, but kind of hippie hair. And so they knew that they weren't part of their group. And they found some literature, but just like things that they'd collected, not that they were distributing. So they just slapped them around and let them go. I said, oh, wow, you know, this is it was a fascist youth group. And then they spotted another guy who was probably 22, a little bit older, again, kind of longish hair, but, they pulled on their armbands and they surrounded him. And there was an older guy wearing a long, like, peacoat, and he started talking to him. And I was just watching. I was like, what's going on? Finally, the older guy reaches out and slaps the student, and the student punches the older guy, and all of these fascists pull out tire irons and chains and start beating him bloody. And he's like trying to push his way through the wolf pack to get away, runs out into the middle of traffic, and gets hit by a jeep of military police. And I was like, thank God the cops are here, you know, at least they'll break this up. And they pile out of the back, grab him, drag him into the alley, and start beating him with a billy club. And so what I realized was, okay, you have the fascist youth groups working with the older guy, the secret police, in concert with the military police, and this is what a dictatorship means. And, you know, I was young, but I always thought, oh, well, if there was, you know, the Nazis tried to get active in the United States, well, that would be, you know, we'd stand up to that. And I have to say that night I was just paralyzed with fear. The only thing, I didn't say anything, I didn't do anything. My resistance was to just keep walking up and down, like witnessing. A lot of good that did, right? But it was very radicalizing. I've never been in a place where I was afraid to express my opinions before. You know, I never knew what democracy meant. You know, it's like the wallpaper, you don't see it, right? It's just always there, you sort of, that's what you live. So I got very active with Spanish students. They were very radical and they were very anti-Franco and very left politically. And in the spring, they invited me to another demonstration. And I thought, oh, good, you know, I mean, we'd go out, we'd block the traffic, Amnistía, Libertad, and then when the cops would come, we'd scatter and, you know, we'd flee the tear gas and the rubber bullets. It's exactly what you want to do when you're 21 years old, right? This time I arrived, and it was always young students or sometimes labor union militants from the Communist Party. And this time I arrived, there was over 100,000 people. It was a Saturday morning, and it was parents with their strollers, old people, and it was, oh my gosh, you know, this is huge. And so they took over the streets and they were marching for democracy. And at a certain point, the buses of military police pulled up and they attacked the crowd. And everybody sat down. You know, they were cowering because they were getting beaten, but they sat down and they were talking into their radios. And the only thing they could have done at that point was to start killing people. And Franco was dead, and they were negotiating where the country would go. So they listened, and then they got back in their buses and they left. And the whole crowd like went crazy because it was the first time in 40 years in which large numbers of people demanding democracy had faced down the military. Right? And so to me, that's democracy in action. That was like, okay, these are democratic values, able to speak and fight for what you believe and do it in ways that are, you know, get heard. And you can do it at the ballot box. When the ballot box doesn't work, you do it in the streets, but that's democracy. So I come to this organizing with those faith values and those democratic values, which are sometimes they don't quite, you know, they don't quite work together. And because I spoke Spanish, I ended up organizing in Latino communities. It wasn't a plan. I started trying to learn Spanish so I could go into business, and then ended up organizing. So now it'll be 40 years. And when you do it for a while, you get better and better at it, and you start learning how to work with many different kinds of people. And so by the time Dave met me, I'd been doing it for 25 years. And now I wasn't just working with Latinos, I was working with a whole bunch of other kinds of groups, which is what immigration to the United States is. So there's sort of a perception that immigration is Latinos. There's 45 million immigrants in the United States, and probably 15 million of them are Latino. So it's 1/3. There's 45 million immigrants to the United States, and 11 million approximately are undocumented. So not even a third, not even a quarter. But that's, you know, Mexicans and illegal immigrants is what gets a lot of the attention. Of the undocumented, probably 5 million, I might be a little bit off on that, are Mexican, meaning that there are many, many, many undocumented. My cousin's married to Chris Kennedy. We were having an argument 2 nights ago, and he said there's 500,000 undocumented Irish immigrants to the United States. I said, I think you're wrong. I think it's 50,000. So he said, no, it's 500,000. I said, well, let's check. This is actually something I know something about, right? So we checked with our friend Billy Lawless, who you probably know. He's a great big guy. He comes from Galway. He runs a whole bunch of restaurants in Chicago. He got to introduce President Obama at the Copernicus Center, the Polish place in northwest side of Chicago. And Barack Obama said, Billy, we're so glad that you came here, because the one thing that Chicago needed was another Irish pub. So Billy is such a great politician that he's now actually a politician. He was named by the Taoiseach, or Taoiseach or something, that's what they call a prime minister, to be a Irish senator, first in history representing Irish in the, diaspora. So now he flies back and forth, and he's actually Senator Lawless. What kind of name is that, right? So I texted him, how many undocumented? There's 50,000 undocumented Irish. Anyway, none of these things quite fit exactly the stereotype that you might have. The undocumented, about 55% come here without a visa, crossing the border illegally. The other 45% arrive at airports legally with visas, students, business visas, tourists, and then they just stay. I think there's 100,000 undocumented Canadians in the United States, right? So yeah, there's this kind of big stereotypes of what this problem is and what this issue is and who these immigrants are. But as Dave said, it gets very complicated very fast. I actually don't think it is that complicated. I actually believe that it is something that can be, sort of the problems are actually very solvable. I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. I think that the backlash now with President Trump and Build the Wall and all of that has to do with people's frustration that the problem has not been solved, and it just feels out of control. And okay, well, we've got to do something different. We got to try and fix this, and and then there's a lot of other going on there. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but I want to just share a little bit about Illinois. Well, let's first of all, for the immigrants, there are 11 million undocumented, and then there are 13 million legal permanent residents, they're called, LPRs, or you might have heard about it, green card holders. So these are people who have gotten permission to come to the United States legally. They can work, they can travel, but they're not citizens. After 5 years, they can become citizens, but they are not able to vote. So that 11 and 13, 24 million of the 45 are not able to vote, politically invisible, and therefore politically powerless. Then there's about 18, 20 million who are naturalized US citizens. And that means that they have taken the time to learn English, study the Constitution, study the history, pay the fee, which is $725, take a test in English, written and verbal, and proven that they understand our history and our government, and then pledged that they allegiance to our Constitution, including being willing to bear arms on behalf of the United States. Those are the naturalized citizens. And then those citizens, or those immigrants, have 18 million US-born children under the age of 18, 17 million. So there's about 900,000 US citizen children of immigrants, some of whose parents are undocumented, but they're all citizens, turning 18 every year. Big wave of new Americans, both the people naturalizing and their children. In the United States, about 31% of the adults have a college education. So in the Chicago metropolitan area, take a guess what percent of the immigrants from India have a college education or better. If 31% is the average for native-born Americans, of the Indian immigrants in our general area, what percent do you think have a college degree or better? 45, 60, 85? It's 72%. Many of them have higher degrees. Okay, so of the Mexican immigrants to the United States in this area, what percent have a college degree or better?
15%.
10%? 5%? Try 5.6%. So what does that mean? What it means is that the people who are coming to the United States, actually, if you think about it, it looks like an hourglass. There are a lot of people that are arriving here with high levels of education, and a lot of people arriving here with low levels of education. And it kind of breaks out by ethnicity, right? Chinese have higher education, Mexicans have lower education. But like if I were a capitalist conservative, which I'm not, but I believed in free markets and free flow of ideas and goods and capital, then I probably would agree that there would be free flow of labor. But I would definitely say that immigration to the United States starts to fill in gaps in the labor market at the top and at the bottom. There was just something on NPR about the fact that in many rural communities, the doctors in the hospitals are from abroad, and that's because the native-born can't make as much money, and the doctors trained in Syria are very happy to practice in small towns in the United States until recently, when it's become much more difficult for their children who are getting bullied in the schools. And so that's one group, and they can all get here with visas. Okay? Then you have a bunch of jobs that have been created in our economy, which are at the bottom. You know, whether it's the people caring for folks in the old people's homes, or agriculture, or tourism, restaurants. And for as long as any of us has been alive, the system for filling those jobs was nod, nod, wink, wink. Come across the border, you don't need papers. It's like what Dave said, you know, stay out, we're hiring. And you won't get paid very well, you won't get treated very well, but your dollars go a long way back home, Mexico usually, but also Central America. You can come here for the harvest. It usually started as agricultural. You can go home during the winter, take your dollars, buy your farm, buy your cows, buy your truck, buy your small store, but get started here. It's mainly men. And have your kids repeat, right? And there's kind of a constant flow. And they got dollars, they got a start in Mexico. We got cheap vegetables. Employers didn't have to pay very much money for agricultural labor. That was the system. Now, the system is very badly broken, and every attempt to fix it has helped to make it worse. So Reagan tried to fix it with an amnesty in '86, and it was retroactive 5 years. So many people that came here after '81, believe it or not, are still without papers. So you could have been here since '81, literally, and still be undocumented. And there are people like that. The efforts to make it harder to cross the border has eliminated, they've been very successful. Every year, fewer Mexicans arrive than are leaving now. And the cost of crossing the border has climbed. The fence has, what it's really done is channel people into deserts. Because the easy places where you used to be able to do it, Tijuana and El Paso, places like that where you just walk from literally a city that was split across, and that's completely over. And so now you have to hire a coyote, somebody to guide you. That costs a lot more money, and of course the coyotes are tied to the cartels, right? So now this, what used to be, the kid who would take you across, through the sewers, they're out of business. Organized crime controls it now. And so that's why they say people are carrying drugs. Sometimes they do, right? So if you're up here, you're working, and all of a sudden it's becoming really expensive and dangerous. More than a person a day dies in the desert, aren't applying. So that they've done a very good job of making life much more difficult for the undocumented. It's harder to get back and forth. It's harder to switch your status. It's dangerous to go back and forth. More people are leaving than arriving from Mexico. But we haven't yet found a way to help the people who've been here for a very long time. And the vast majority came between 1990 and 2005. And after the crash in 2008, the numbers just plummeted because they come to work, and if there's not a job. So we're stuck with a system that isn't, you have all these human beings that came here a long time ago, most of them, and they are not able to get legal. Now their kids are raised here. If they have a child, the child's a US citizen, they're not going back. They're never going to get Social Security. The Democrats have already ceded that. So even if they get legal, they're going to grow old in really abject poverty. And the American public, since September 11th, has said this is not a good system. We can't have a gigantic swamp of document fraud and identity theft. That's a security problem, and this needs to be solved, right? So time after time after time, we've gotten really close to solving it, and everybody knows what it will take to solve it. And it actually is very solvable. And every time we get close, something absolutely horrible happens, and up to and including the most recent elections. So think about it. George Bush, goes riding on his ranch with Vicente Fox. And he says, we're not going to solve the whole enchilada, but at least we're going to take care of the Mexican problem. And literally 6 or 7 days later, September 11th happens. And that initiative is off the table. Then they do the Patriot Act, and oh my God, if they had just said, look, this is unsafe to have 11 million people, we don't know who they are in this country, you have to come forward, you have to file, register, we're going to fingerprint you, criminals have to go home, people who are just working, raising families can stay, you can't have citizenship, but at least we're going to drain the swamp, and that's part of the Patriot Act, would have passed like that. That didn't happen. So I've read Bush's autobiography, he actually says, and I heard him in an interview, well, what mistakes did you make as president? He doesn't identify a lot of mistakes. He's not a guy that second-guessed himself a lot. The one that he pointed out was, he said, after I got reelected, I started with privatization of Social Security. Thought I had a lot of political capital. We had a Republican Senate, Republican House, Republican President. I tried to privatize Social Security. We failed. The wheels came off the bus, and when I tried to do immigration reform, I couldn't get my own party to support me on it. Okay? Obama gets elected. Immigrant community is absolutely galvanized, mobilizing behind him. You know, we're going to fix this. Poor McCain, who'd actually, you know, really spent some political capital trying to come up with solutions, didn't get any immigrant votes. Obama gets in and he does the bailout, and he does the infrastructure bill, and he does the healthcare thing, and then he says, sorry, can't do anything else. We're a little worried about midterms. He had Democratic House, Democratic Senate. He said, and just, you know, to make your life a little bit miserable, more miserable, I'm going to increase deportations because I got to prove to the Republicans that I'm serious about enforcement because they're not going to do this 3 more times. So Obama deported more people than all US presidents combined. You know, I got arrested in front of the White House with Gutierrez, Congressman Gutierrez. And I've known Obama since he was a community organizer, you know, down on the South Side. It was awful. So we just, you know, and I mean, believe me, to get arrested with a Latino congressman in front of the home of the Democratic president, who's the first African-American president in American history, and to call him deporter-in-chief, that's not a small thing. I mean, that's why there was only one congressman willing to do it. The Democrats didn't want to call him out. And, you know, the families that we work with were just getting hammered. So Obama was not getting Latino support for his reelection. And, I mean, really not getting it. And the people that were working with him, the Latinos, were saying, they hate us. You got to fix it. That's why he did in June, I think it was June 15th of 2011, Deferred Action for Children of Americans, the Dreamers, where he gave temporary legal status to the young people who'd been brought here. And we had an event to process people at Navy Pier. Basically, we were so sick of Obama, we said, okay, we're going to hold an event to process people. You say 2 months to get the processing started. We're calling the event at Navy Pier. And if you don't have it ready, we're going to take them all over to your headquarters at the Prudential Building, and it's going to be a demonstration about how you've lied to us again. I got to tell that to Janet Napolitano in Homeland Security, right? Yeah, this is like fun for Chicago. And all right, let's get in the gutter. So we were prepared for a massive workshop, and we processed on that single day 1,500 applications, and 15,000 young people came. It was stunning, and Obama rode that to a huge amount of Latino and Asian support for his reelection. And the Republican Party at that time said, "Okay, let's do it." You know, they did with an autopsy. And they said, "This is really bad for the Republican Party." Romney supported it, Boehner supported it, Gingrich supported it. And then what did Obama do? Made the same stupid mistake that Bush did when he got reelected. Do you remember the first thing Obama tried to do when he got reelected? How much attention were you paying? No junkies here, okay. Sandy Hook, he tried to do gun control, right? He couldn't even get it through the Democratic Senate. And then he got nothing else done for the next 3 years, because rather than picking something that gives him momentum, where he can have a win and can be bipartisan, he picks something that's hyper-partisan, that activates the people that hate him, and then he loses, and then he can't get anything done, right? This is sort of like, you just got, in a very short time, my last 15 years, right? So then people are sick of that. And in this election, the candidate who started by calling Mexican rapists and by promising a wall, you know, he galvanized that part of the American body politic that is really angry about immigration, but also about immigrants. and also really afraid of how much the country's changed, afraid of the new people that they don't know, can't talk to, afraid of Muslims and the potential for attack. Like before the election, I had David Axelrod. I'm in a men's history book club, so it's all old men, and we read history books. And so a lot of them were former reporters from the Tribune, and one of them asked David Axelrod to come because he just did an autobiography called True Believer, so we read it, and then he came and we talked politics, and this was about June. And he said, oh no, Trump, he's self-immolating every week. He's not going anywhere. He's the Herman Cain of this election season. People need something during the summer to entertain themselves. He's not going anywhere. I was like, I'm not sure you're right. Because I know from this work that, prior to this election, if you poll Americans and you say, okay, an illegal immigrant's house is burning down, should taxpayer funds be used to pay the firemen to put the fire out? 19% of the people in this country say, let it burn, right? That's how angry, 1/5 of America is about immigrants and immigration. So, but it's much more than 1/5 of the Republican electorate. So you had people like Bush, who spoke beautiful Spanish. I talked to him in Spanish, Jeb Bush. Rubio also spoke beautiful Spanish, but it's not as much of a feat. It wasn't a second language. You had a lot of people that wanted to try and figure out how to solve this problem and didn't want to racialize the elections. And then you had Trump appealing to that group, and he did very, very well. So now we have a president, and I've been talking lots about numbers and policies and this kind of stuff, but there's a friend of mine, and this is my wife, Joanna. She's been working in this same field for many, many, many years. We have a friend, her name is Erendira Rendon. She's Mexican, I would say Mexican-American, except she's undocumented. She was brought here when she was 4 years old. Her parents are from Oaxaca. We've actually visited the family in Oaxaca. She went to the University of Illinois. I'm very working class. They lived in Harvard, Illinois. They kind of were a family that fell off the migrant trail. The family had originally been farm workers and then settled out. She was raised there. She put herself through the University of Illinois. That's where I met her. She was a classmate of my son's, and she was public about being undocumented and working for immigration reform. So she was graduated. She came to work for me doing electoral organizing. Our organization was attacked multiple times for registering illegals to vote. And they were wrong. We do not do that. That's illegal. And if somebody who is not a citizen registers to vote, that makes them immediately eligible for deportation. That's like an unforgivable sin in this immigration world. We don't do that. However, we have many young undocumented students helping people to register themselves to vote and helping turn people out to vote, because they understand that in a democracy, you have to be able to mobilize your supporters. They can't vote, but they can ask others to vote for them. And that's actually how our organization ended up getting some very pro-immigrant legislation in Illinois. We actually have a very immigrant-friendly state at this point, much more friendly than just the numbers would believe, and that's because we took the politics seriously. Erendira did that work. Then she became a community organizer. She went to work for a horrible organization. She was very successful at the organizing, threatened the boss with her competence, got fired. I got her a different organization where they liked competence. She's been really, really active in training immigrant women in the schools, mothers, working with Joanna. helping people who are legal permanent residents to become citizens, mobilizing to win driver's licenses for the undocumented in Illinois. And she's become a very good organizer. So she eventually got the temporary legal status, protected status from Obama. And because of that, she was now legally able to travel. You could get what's called advance parole. She could leave the country with permission to come back. So, Joanne and I encouraged her to do that. She wasn't doing it, and she wasn't doing it, and she wasn't doing it. And okay, we're gonna go travel together this summer. How come you haven't put the application in? She said, you know what, I'm afraid to hope. I've been disappointed so many times that I'm afraid to put the application in because, what if it doesn't happen? And I get disappointed again. I said, well, I get it. That's really hard. The worst kind of oppression is what you do to yourself. You're in a really difficult situation. Now just file the fucking application. And so she did. And she then got permission. So she got to go back to Oaxaca for the first time since she was 4, meet all of her cousins, her nephews, her uncles and aunts, see where she was from. And then she's very Catholic, so we had gotten her invited to go to a leadership training program in Hungary and Bulgaria. But we said, well, we could get one other country. Where do you want to go? She said Italy. She wanted to go to Rome, so we went to Rome. So we got to do that this summer. And, it felt great. I got pictures on top of St. Peter's, and they have something called a beauty cam, which takes away all your wrinkles and makes your skin glow. And anyway, so I got a picture of the beauty cam of me and her on top of St. Peter's. So then after the election, literally the day after the election, she walked into my office and she put her head down on my chest and started sobbing. That's the impact in the immigrant community. She didn't know what was going to happen with her limited protection and all of her parents, her uncles, her aunts. We come so close so many times to sort of solving the problem, and now they're in the target of the bullseye, and it's being demonized for their nationality. You haul up the people who are, now we have the dreamers, the kids, and it's very powerful messengers. So President Trump hauls up the angel moms, the mothers of people who have been killed by illegal immigrants, right? And so that's okay, are they dreamers or are they criminals? And it's two competing narratives. And I'm from Chicago. That's where the St. Valentine's Day Massacre happened. That was the Italian drug gang wiping out the Irish drug gang, right? So we put the gangsters in prison. We didn't deport all Italians and all Irish, and we're a better country for it, right? But, that politics of fear is something that has been very effective throughout our history. So yes, we are a nation of immigrants, and yes, we value the fact that we are a place that people want to come to, and that the Statue of Liberty stands for refuge from fleeing violence and persecution. But at the same time, we're ambivalent about it as a country. So I'm going to stop because actually I really now what questions do people have or debate? I don't pretend, I hope not everybody in this room agrees with me and we can actually have a real conversation about it. But I wanted to end with Erendira because, what was it? Stalin said, 1 casualty is a tragedy, 1 million casualties is a statistic. You talk about 11 million people, that's hard to imagine. You talk about Erendira and her family, that's very personal. And I feel it personally. I have now been arrested 10 times doing civil disobedience, protesting Democrats, protesting Republicans, equal opportunity protester. And we've actually moved the needle in Illinois. It used to be that Rahm Emanuel said, this issue is the third rail for Democrats, don't touch it, right? That was what he said when he was the head of the Democratic Campaign Coordinating Committee. You know, now he brags that he's made the most immigrant-friendly city in the country. The Democrats have all embraced the issue, and it wasn't easy. They're now using it as a wedge to hurt the Republican Party. And in Illinois, there's a very serious group of business Republicans that work for immigration reform. And there's a, you know, we had the bill to, Illinois has the highest percentage of Latino children in the country that are insured. Something that I would say we do right. It's because we insure undocumented children. We're one of 2 or 3 states. So that just came before the legislature this past spring, and half of the Republicans in the House and half the Republicans in the Senate voted for it, and Governor Rauner signed it. So in Illinois, people have said, okay, let's figure out how we coexist in ways where we're not just hurting each other, but we're trying to find solutions. But we're not there as a country. So my most recent arrest was a week ago Monday, a week ago tomorrow, with Congressman Gutierrez. Now, inside Department of Homeland Security, it wasn't much of an arrest. They put us in handcuffs, and then somebody came running down the hall and said, stand down, cut the handcuffs off, cut the handcuffs off. They didn't want the picture of Congressman Gutierrez in handcuffs because he was in their office asking for what was going to happen to this woman, particular case. But we got the picture. It was too late. They didn't stand down quite fast enough. Anyway, I'll stop. I'm actually really curious about questions and quite willing to give my perspective on these debates. Understand this. And there's a group of people that really don't want it to happen on the Republican populist end of the spectrum. But people understand the solution is I'll call it a 4.5-legged stool. First of all, the border has to be harder to cross. And a huge amount of money has already been invested, and it's already much harder to cross. So that was what Obama wanted the Republicans to sort of give him credit for. They never did. But the fact is that if you just track how much it costs to get here illegally, the cost has gone way up because it's so dangerous, supply and demand. But of course, there's more that can be done, and every single military contractor that sells drones and radar and everything else wants a piece of that. So border's one. Okay, why do people come here? They come here to work, right? And when I used to give these speeches a lot, I would carry my Social Security card. If anybody's got it, take a look at it. It's ridiculous. It's something that could be copied in a Xerox machine, right? Why is that? Because employers don't want it to be elsewise. They want to be able to hire these people, and they don't want to churn their workforce. Now compare that to your driver's license. The driver's license has become the de facto national ID since the Real ID Act after September 11th. So it's unbelievable. It's got like holograms and biometric identifiers and chips and electronic things, and it's like that all over the country. So you could easily connect that to the Social Security database. Anytime you want to get a job, you have to swipe it. The picture of the person comes up, and it makes it almost impossible to work illegally, right? So they call that E-Verify, and that's something that people that are trying to fix this, and even people on the conservative end say we have to have E-Verify. You have to make it harder to work illegally. There's always be a little bit of the economy that's cash. Okay, that's number 2. Number 3 is what do you do about the people that have been here for all of this time and came under the old system? You know, are you going to lock them all up? Well, then let's lock up everybody that employs them too. I'm pretty sick of that hypocrisy, right? You know, what about the illegal employers, right? Or the illegal lettuce eaters, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who've got a stake in this broken system. If you've been working, you've been paying taxes, you haven't hurt anybody, you're raising your family, then you got to hit the reset button and allow those people some path to be able to become legal, right? That's the horrifying amnesty that you hear about on Fox TV all the time. And so then the last thing is, well, our economy is still going to need some high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers and immigration, because white people aren't having babies as much anymore, right? I mean, we're starting to get like Europe or Japan, where we're below replacement, and who's going to pay our Social Security? It's got to be young workers. So there's some level of immigration, you can debate the specifics, that is important, and it's much better to create visa types, just like you have for the high skilled, for the low skilled, so that they can come here legally, right? So those are the four legs of the stool, and then the fifth one is kind of what they did in the EU. It's sort of a half leg because we don't do it very well, we don't think about it, it's never linked to comprehensive immigration reform. There's a reason people are leaving. You know, if you destroy the family farms in Mexico, which they did just like they did here, and then you put 20 million people off the land, where are they going to go? Well, first they're going to go to Mexico City, and then they're going to come here. If you have horrendous violence in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, and mothers are terrified that their young boys are going to get killed, they're going to come here, right? So the fifth leg of the stool is you do the kind of economic development that strengthens and stabilizes economies so that there's much less of a push factor, right? So you've kind of eliminated the pull factor or made it less, you know, hiring now, come on. You've created legal ways to get here, you've reduced the push factor, and you've allowed people who are real stakeholders to get to become legal. That's going to solve a huge percentage of the problem. Now, on every one of those things, people argue on the edges. How many immigrants do you really want? What is it that's really good for the economy? Do we have enough drones on the border? Is it secure enough, or do we need another 1,000 miles of wall? Do we give people that we're giving legal status to a path to citizenship, so they're just like the rest of us and we don't have a permanent subclass in the United States, in our democracy? Or do you just give them legal status and nothing more? So every one of those things, the devil's always in the details. But the basic understanding of what it takes to fix the problem, the architecture has been known for a very long time and is technologically possible. So other